when death is on the line. And then he falls over dead, still smiling.
So the pirate's cup was the poisoned one?
No, they both were. Turns out he'd spent years developing an immunity to it just for such an occasion.
Ah, clever indeed. Never let an opponent have all the information, but absolutely let them think that they do.
Poor Poe. Viper knew he was a fanboy, but she still didn't realize that he would just shut down when faced with all of them at once. If she had invited Shifu, he probably would have had a heart attack. As it was, he'd only managed to make a fool of himself in front of his idols. Poor guy. Well, maybe it wasn't that bad. After Viper had tried to distract the others by gushing over the secret ingredient soup, Poe had apparently found himself in more familiar territory and managed to take their orders. He'd still stammer, especially when talking to Tigress. But eventually, they'd gotten their food, and it had more than made up for the initial awkwardness. Monkey and Crane even said they'd have to eat there more often. Yay! Right now, they were exploring the market, or they'd started to. Taylor had seen a group of pigs and geese in workers' wear unloading cargo to the general store, and after the owner had chewed out one poor pig for dropping a crate of glass vases, Taylor had gone over and begun introducing them to the concept of a workers' union. Most of them had dropped what they were doing and were paying close attention. One goose had even started taking notes. Crane and Mantis had wandered off to browse the market, but the rest stayed to watch Taylor. It was actually kind of amazing. The shy girl she and Crane had gotten to know had suddenly become the stern figure. She'd noticed a problem and made moves to resolve it. Tigress watched in mild wonder.
Wow, it's almost like she's passionate about this or something. Wish you'd show that in her training.
Viper leveled her best stern glare at her.
What does that mean? Taylor.
I won't deny she has determination. She certainly doesn't do anything halfway. But it's like... No, that's not quite it. I agree that she seems to not have an end goal in mind, though.
Viper struggled to defend her friend, but found they weren't exactly wrong, and so settled for simply huffing at them. Taylor appeared to wrap up with the workers, and after several of them insisted on shaking her wing, she came back to join them.
Sorry about the wait, guys. Where to now?
That was really cool, Taylor. Did you come up with all that on your own?
No. The union was a really big thing back home, really important to the city. My dad was the head of hiring, which means he was in charge of making sure only trustworthy, honest, relatively honest people were allowed to join.
It seemed really important to you.
Of course. If the employers have full say in employees' pay, then it's way too easy for them to get taken advantage of. No one ever sticks up for the little guy, so we've got to stick out for each other. That is a cool-looking sword.
Yes, but don't look at it for too long, for...
Ow! What the hell?
For the Sword of Heroes is a masterwork, and sharper than the limits of its metal. Only a master can stand to even look at it, let alone wield it.
How does that even work?
As I said, a masterwork.
Taylor marveled at the objects and tapestries on display. She'd seen the Hall of Warriors from the outside. Of course she had. It was the center of the palace, but she'd never been inside before now. She'd been preoccupied with other things, and at any rate, she'd been told that you were only allowed to enter unless you were a master, or escorted by one. Well, Oogway had decided he wanted to show her something in here, so now she had an escort. It was beautiful in here. Everything, the weapons, the armor, and even the walls and pillars themselves were works of art, to say nothing of the actual works of art.
What's with the empty display? Is one of them rented out or something?
Ah, you've noticed the invisible trident of destiny. According to legends, it can only be seen by its destined wielder, the one who will use it to save all of China. No one has ever been able to see it, but I believe the fated warrior will come someday.
Tailor squinted at the empty rack, then at Oogway.
You're screwing with me, aren't you? These artifacts are really cool. Sorry, Master Oogway. But what are we doing here?
Shifu is of the opinion that now that your wings are healed, that you can move on from mere exercise and begin refining a formal style. He won't show it where you can see, but he's quite excited.
Oh, really?
Oh, yes. He's never trained an owl before, and he's looking forward to crafting a style around your natural abilities. In the coming days, you will begin learning Kung Fu in earnest, little owl. But Kung Fu is more than simply punching and kicking. It is more than the body. It is clarity of mind, and it is lightness of heart. For an hour every day, when it's up to you, I would like you to come to this room and meditate. Reflect upon your day, the future, the past. All I ask is that you take the time to practice self-reflection, and there are few better places for such than the moon pool.
I really just have to sit here and do nothing for an hour a day?
It isn't nothing. But yes, for now. Later on, you can find a more you way to meditate, if you prefer. But the basics are the basics for a reason.
For the next several days, things settled into a routine. Shifu doubled down on her stealth training, and she even managed to get the drop on Viper once. Being able to fly really helped. She'd known that owls were silent flyers, but she'd not been certain how much that would apply. After all, snakes were supposed to be deaf and half blind, but Viper clearly wasn't either of those. She had moved from spot to spot as fast as she could, touching as little as possible until she was certain she was perfectly hidden. She'd waited until there was an unobstructed path between her and Viper, and as soon as the snake was looking the other direction, she glided over and snatched the flowers off her head. Exactly once. Viper had apparently been holding back before, and now that Tailor could catch her when she wasn't focused, she had to work on doing it when she was. At least she was good at avoiding them when they were the hunters. Shifu had started her training with the five, somewhat. For the past month, they'd been doing their own training, but now Shifu wanted to get things back to something resembling normal. So while she was working, she got to watch the others work too. It was slightly discouraging. Mantis was blindingly fast, and despite his size, he could lift boulders over his head and cut them in half with his bare limbs. Viper and Monkey both were so slippery and acrobatic. Watching them spar with each other at full speed made her head spin. Shifu had actually had her spar with Crane, and despite his best efforts, it was embarrassing. It was silly. She'd only just gotten into the air, and yet she'd felt like a failure with the larger bird flying circles around her. She did manage to surprise him for a moment when they grappled. She'd made him flinch by snapping her beak in front of his eyes, and used the opening to try and crash him into the ground. But he'd twisted at the last moment, and she'd eaten dirt instead. And then there was Tigress. All of the five had their strengths, and Tigress's was strength. When she threw a punch, the air itself quaked, and even aside from raw power, she clearly had the most technical skill of any of them. Tailor felt that comparing her to Sophia was doing her a disservice, but she couldn't help it. For all that the big cat had stopped with the glaring and sneers, she still cut an intimidating figure. Man, thinking about it, Sophia was probably kind of messed up. At least Tigress had the excuse of actually being a predator. There wasn't really a good reason for Sophia to have carried herself like she was a cat among mice. The five and Shifu were awesome, and she was over here just learning stances. She was essentially just posing. Viper kept insisting she'd get there too someday, and she knew she'd still only just started. But in the face of just how far she had to go,
It made me wonder why I even bothered. Master Oogway joined me for these sessions sometimes, but not tonight. I enjoyed his company, but I wanted some alone time right now. I really did need to think. Why was I doing this? I looked into the pool and met the dragon statue's eyes. I know it was ridiculous, but I still felt like it was judging me. I've been here for what, nearly 2 months? I don't feel like I'm doing anything. Do I even want to learn Kung Fu? I think I do. I meant what I said when I didn't want to be helpless. But I'm not anymore, I think. I know I've gotten stronger, and if nothing else, I can fly away from any trouble that overwhelms me. Oh, the flying. Yes, that is, by far and without question, the greatest thing that has ever happened to me. It almost made it worth it to... No, it didn't. I let my shoulders fall. What am I even talking about? Does it matter whether I want to learn martial arts or not? It's not like there's anything else for me to do. There's nowhere for me to go, and I doubt they'd let me stay in the palace just because I had no purpose. Even before all that, my only goal was getting from one day to the next with the minimum of fuss, and that totally went well. On the other hand, look where keeping my head down got me. I huffed. Well, where it got me was ancient animal China, but my point remains. Being passive didn't solve anything. I couldn't fight back at the time, but now... Well, I was getting there, I think. Viper and the others told me that they got famous saving the valley from a crazed boar. I didn't really care about fame, but I always did dream of being a hero.